Welcome back to the Sports Next Door podcast. My name is Owen, and I am joined once again, as I always am, by my virtual neighbor, Max. How was your weekend, my friend?
Pretty good. I keep thinking we've only got every time it's sunny, it's going to be the last sunny day we have for a while, and I keep getting happily proven wrong.
Yeah.
So I got to have a nice run, nice walk in the park, and yeah, pretty good weekend.
Beauty. Yeah, it was tough for me because the nice weather kind of lined up with the 10 hours of football yesterday, so
Um,
I didn't get to go outside much. But you know me, I look forward to the winter season every year, and we're finally here. December starts tomorrow, which is crazy to think, but hey, 1 month until 2020 is over. Am I right?
I mean, that's a nice way to look at it. I'm looking at it more as 9, 10 infinite months into the COVID cycle. I'll try and adopt a bit more of your optimism.
Yeah, if you look at it the other way, the universe has 1 month left to throw whatever it's got left at us.
I
So I
mean,
wouldn't be surprised if the aliens came down tomorrow.
It's it's been the first year of 2020, or the only year of 2020, the year, but you could say it's the first year of the 2020 decade. So fingers
Oh,
crossed we get some really good shit going January 2021, and I can
yes.
just dispel all that negativity.
Yeah, we can only hope, right?
In the meanwhile, luckily, we've got some sports going on to distract us. So tell me about your Sunday.
Of course. Looking at our Sunday, the two games that I had kind of lined up for the weekend ended up being pretty entertaining, but the results didn't end up feeling that close. The first game that I talked about was the Colts and the Titans, and just like we said, the Titans just ended up being the more physical team, and especially they came out on fire. Like they scored 35 points in the first half, and it was mostly Derrick Henry, and he's just whenever it becomes later in the season around this time, week 12, week 13, he just gets better and better, and he's an absolute unit, right? So if you think about it, in the NFL season, as it goes along, you're getting beat up, you're getting battered, you're feeling sore, and you just don't want to get out on the field and tackle this 6'4", 230-pound wall of muscle that's coming at you time and time again through the hole. And I thought it'd be a pretty interesting exercise because um, obviously you don't want to do either, but I want to hear from you. What would you rather do? Do you think you'd rather tackle Derrick Henry or take a punch from Mike Tyson?
Oof. Uh, I'd try and tackle Derrick Henry. Just the fear factor would be less. Mike Tyson, like I've already lost before I step in there. I don't know enough about Derrick Henry, so I can ignorance is bliss, and I can hype myself up into believing it, and maybe that'll make the end result a bit less painful, even though it'll probably go exactly the same. You?
Yeah, I see it as this. With Mike Tyson, it's probably one swift blow and you wake up the next day and it's like, oh, I did it.
We've seen that in The Hangover. Tyson clocks.
Yeah.
Man, I can't think of the guy's name, but we all know it.
But with Derrick Henry, I feel like if I tried to tackle that dude, he would break every bone in my body and just, it would be like hit my chest. Then he's just going to step all over my body as he just rumbles past me. So I don't know. I feel like I'd feel the effects of that one a lot longer.
Fair
It's just
enough.
neither is a very welcoming proposition.
No. So did those first 35 points just put the game pretty much out of reach?
Yeah, essentially. I believe it was 35-10 at halftime or something like that. And from there, the Titans continued to run the ball against the Colts defensive line, who they were missing DeForest Buckner, who was kind of their blue chipper on that line. So they just couldn't really stop the run, and the Titans ended up chilling for most of the second half. And then there was an onside kick late in the game that got returned for a touchdown. AJ Brown timed it up and just high pointed it and then took it to the house. So that was the last nail in the coffin. But after that first half was over, it didn't really feel close, even though the Colts started to make their way back.
I mean,
So
I feel like
yeah,
if you can win the first half with your running game, then like that's the best position I'd want to be into going the second half, because it ain't broke, so you don't have to fix it, and that's the exact strategy you want to run when you've got a lead.
Exactly. And it just, now the Titans regain first place in the AFC South over the Colts, and they look to be in a pretty good position in terms of playoffs. And so that's a team that I wouldn't want to play as a higher seed because they're just so physical. And when it gets later in the year, when it's, well, in America, they'd use Fahrenheit, but here, if it's under 0, like, it's going to be so painful trying to tackle some of those dudes on that team, especially Derrick Henry. So it's just kind of what happened last year, right? That's how they made it to the AFC Championship game, is no one could tackle them in those first couple rounds of the playoffs. Yeah. Moving on, I just have to take 30 seconds here to rant about some coaching that I saw this weekend. The first of which being Anthony Lynn. So the Los Angeles Chargers are kind of like the LA Clippers in Los Angeles, where they're the team that no one really cares about, and they probably shouldn't be in Los Angeles, but they're there because their owner has a lot of money and bought a stadium and wants to play there, but they should be somewhere else. And last year they drafted this kid, Justin Herbert, who is absolutely spectacular, and people had questions, and he's answered them all so far this season. And I don't know, to put it in basketball terms, if it makes it easier, I feel like Justin Herbert's kind of like Trae Young if Trae Young didn't have to play defense. So
Right.
he's just spectacular and has some obviously rookie mistakes, but he's very exciting to watch. And the Chargers are just cursed. They're 3-8. Even with this spectacular quarterback, they've had some bad injury luck, but it's 4th and 27, and they convert this Hail Mary. Like, Justin Herbert just chucks it up into a crowd of 5 guys. It deflects off one. Receiver comes down with it, gets tackled around the 3-yard line. The Chargers run up. They have no timeouts left. There's 30 seconds left in the game. They're down 10, and they run up. They don't spike the ball. They don't run an end zone play. They run it. They try running the ball on 1st and goal. They get stopped. No timeouts, so the clock keeps running. And by the time they actually have another play, there's 5 seconds left in the game. So it's like, Anthony Lynn, what are you doing? What? So I think I'd be very surprised if he's not fired because of how they've underperformed, and just something like that. The time management the entire game was just horrific from Anthony Lynn. So I just had to rant about that. And then the other rant I have is Cliff Kingsbury of the Arizona Cardinals. Tie game against the Patriots, and it's 2nd and 10, I believe, and they get a stop, and he calls their last timeout because, of course, he wants to get the ball back. But if you call timeout, you got to make sure that the Patriots don't get a first down on this next play, because you've stopped the clock for them, and they don't have any timeouts left, and there's still 30 seconds left in the game. Cam Newton proceeds to scramble for a first down, gets out of bounds. They run the ball 1 or 2 more times, spike it with 3 seconds left, and kick the game-winning field goal. And it
It's
wouldn't
like
have
Belichick.
happened. Oh, and on top of that, when he ran out of bounds, one of the guys on Arizona's defense, Isaiah Simmons, took a unnecessary roughness penalty, which helped give them 15 extra yards. It's just, if you're calling that timeout, you got to be absolutely sure that your defense is going to get that stop there on 3rd down, because otherwise you give New England the chance to win the game on a field goal. Whereas if you don't call that timeout, the clock runs out and you have better luck in overtime in a
As in
game where you have the playmaker in Kyler Murray.
as in how confident are you in your defense versus their offense? And they should have understood that their offense would have more to gain from the timeout than their defense did.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. He's been conservative all year in terms of play calling, and then he does something aggressive like that because he's trying to win in the last couple seconds, and it ends up screwing his team. And I didn't like the call of the timeout, so I had to rant about that.
Yes, there were 2 coach firings this week, eh?
Yeah, uh, the Lions lost their coach and general manager, and that's just because they suck. And Matt Patricia, they brought him in because he was the defensive coordinator of that Patriots Super Bowl winning team where they had the interception on the goal line against Seattle. He was the DC for that team, and he's also an aeronautical engineer, rocket scientist. So everyone thought, oh, this dude's smart. He's going to do better than our previous coach, Jim Caldwell, who actually had a winning record, and he didn't. And the Lions suck. Once again, they have never won a Super Bowl in the Super Bowl era and continue to be extremely disappointing. And they also fired their general manager, and just I don't know what the way forward is for this team because they are perpetually stuck in kind of that 5 to 10 draft pick range, but never tank fully enough to get a franchise changing player, but are always successful enough that they stay outside of that, but they don't make the playoffs. So it sucks being a it's kind of like how the Leafs have been, quite honestly.
Yeah,
And
that
that's kind of what you
changed.
see
We
with the
had that
Lions.
run of Nylander, Matthews, Marner in 3 consecutive years, and
Yeah,
I guess the hockey we were lucky. Marner and Nylander came in drafts deep enough where we could pick them up. I think were they both fourth overall? I know Nylander was.
I believe so. Yeah.
And then obviously some draft luck with Matthews.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't have minded Liney, but time will tell on that
Well,
decision.
the NFL doesn't have a lottery, right? So you
Right.
just basically have to tank for that number one pick, and I think that's what the Lions need to do at this point. And maybe move on from Matt Stafford, see if you can get some assets back for him because someone could definitely use a quarterback of that caliber. Moving on to the other game that stood out that I had previewed, Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady. And this is also going to tie into my fantasy performer of the week. Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill hooked up for 269 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. And Tyreek Hill put up 50 points, at least in my PPR scoring league. He put up more in some other leagues, and it was ridiculous. And all of that was in the first half.
Fuck.
So Tyreek Hill becomes the third player since 1980 to have 200 receiving yards in a quarter. And I mean, Patrick Mahomes if this is the last time him and Tom Brady ever play each other, he can say that he went 2-2 against the GOAT as he starts to make his case towards becoming one of the all-time greats. And he just was incredible today. And everyone was watching that game, and he knew he had to put on a show, and he did. He threw for 460 yards, and it was just really awesome to watch. And on Tampa Bay's side, that's 2 losses in a row for them now, and you just don't know what you're going to get from them week to week because they've had some great performances, and then they've had some really eye-opening performances in terms of can they operate efficiently on the offensive side of the ball. It looks like Tom Brady and his receivers are sometimes out of sync, so it'll be interesting to see how they respond moving forward.
So was
And
it
then
the offense that disappointed you about the Bucks, or the inability to stop Mahomes and Hill?
Well, on the defensive side, it was just a matchup problem, but also kind of silly scheming. If you match up, Carlton Davis has been playing really well this year at corner for them. But if you match him up against Tyreek one-on-one, all Tyreek has to do is run in a straight line or a slanted line for 60 yards, and Mahomes is going to hit him. So you kind of need to provide some over the top help once you get beat twice by this guy. And they started doing that. And then the Chiefs started nickeling and diming underneath. And it just shows kind of how unstoppable the offense is. So I can't really blame the defense. It's more Tom Brady had 2 picks and a lot of throws that were just poor percentage throws deep into coverage, deep into double coverage. And so with all the weapons that Tampa Bay offense has, it's surprising that they were playing so poorly on offense.
Huh.
Yeah.
Fun game.
Moving on. Yeah. Uh, the last game that stood out to me was my poor Denver Broncos, who a couple days before had announced that none of their quarterbacks were available for the game. So Jeff Driscoll, the backup quarterback, uh, tested positive for COVID, and then all the other quarterbacks were deemed close contacts and eligible to play. So they had to bring up practice roster wide receiver Kendall Hinton, who played backup quarterback in college for Wake Forest. And he completed 1 pass, had 2 interceptions, and the Broncos scored 3 points, which is honestly a success because they were running a lot of wildcat offense, which just looked terrible. And the New Orleans Saints defense is the number 1 ranked defense in the league. So it was just a poor showing. They lost 31-3, I believe. And I mean, it's honestly more indicative of how terrible a job the NFL has been doing that they let this game go when a team had no quarterback. And it turned into something kind of fun. We were all expecting Kendall Hinton to have some sort of miracle game, but it really shows that all those kind of couch potatoes at home thinking, oh, yeah, I could throw that pass in an NFL game. Well, this dude played college quarterback and is an extreme athlete and completed one pass and couldn't do anything on the field. So it's just interesting to see that level of pro sport is just so much higher than you could even imagine.
Nice ego check reminder.
Yeah.
Do you think if the Denver Broncos had more realistic playoff aspirations, the NFL handles that any differently?
Yeah, I think it does because you look at this game. So the Steelers and Ravens game got moved to Tuesday now, and it'll be a good game because hopefully a lot of those Ravens players who tested positive will be back. And I think that's a huge money thing for the NFL because if the Ravens had to play a game this weekend, they surely would have lost and then probably been out of the playoff picture. But the NFL knows that they kind of need the Ravens Steelers game. That's a big marquee game for them. They need that game to go at whatever, with the Ravens having 80% of their roster because it's important for playoff implications. And I definitely think if the Broncos had been in a playoff position, that this game would have been handled differently, which is kind of frustrating. But again, it's 2020, right?
I mean, this is the theme I'm kind of being reminded of. I'm always thinking about this when I'm watching UFC. I'd kind of forgotten it applied to other like major league brand sports, but money is king.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, we'll be talking about that a lot this season.
Yeah, and that's frustrating. And I think the NFL, because they only have, I think there's 1 week left of buys. So after that, we get into the final stretch. And if they have any games that they have to postpone, they're going to have to add an extra week to the season because there's nowhere to hide. You can't move things around anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, why not? People watch the Super Bowl because it's Super Bowl weekend, not because it's any whatever weekend of February. Like, I agree. I hope they do that and don't sacrifice some legitimate sports opportunity.
Me too. Last thing to talk about, I just got to give myself a pat on the back. Wayne Gallman put up nearly 100 rushing yards and a touchdown this weekend. He was my fantasy sleeper, so good for me. And I also nailed another pick, but we will talk about that after we take a quick break. And welcome back once again to the Sports Next Door podcast. We're going to jump right into Max's Combat Corner. So we're going to start with, I believe, the boxing that happened on Saturday night. Max, why don't you kick us off? Walk me through it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you set up a pretty nice segue there talking about your high level fantasy intuition. So I feel like I got to start where you left off and just give you a shout out for making a good pick. Did you put any money on that minus 800?
No comment.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with the decision, to be clear. I thought Tyson won the fight pretty handily. I gave round 3 to Jones. One judge had round 6 scored 10-10, which I kind of liked because they both actually had some good moments in that round. And then I didn't really see anything in round 8 that let me know which way to score it. But I thought every other round Tyson won quite handily, and that's 5 rounds. So even if you give all 3 rounds I just outlined to Jones, I still don't see how he gets the scorecard. As a side note to that, as someone who's newer to boxing, I found it kind of nice to be trying to score 2-minute rounds instead of 3-minute rounds. It's just a little easier to know. Let's keep going from there, though, and talk about the fight. For what it was, 2 guys in their 50s which just is going to have a lot of question marks in a sparring match. I mean, you see prime UFC heavyweights who look a lot worse than they did. Both guys had power and both guys wanted to fight. They didn't just want to stand tentatively and look at each other and feint at the air. I mean, that you might have to give most of the credit for that to Mike Tyson because he came out trying to take Roy Jones's head off. But you've got to give a lot of credit to Roy Jones too, because he worked with what he had and managed to not get his head taken off. And I was skeptical about his ability to do that because I didn't think what he does best, footwork, head movement, and crazy speed, would be enough to not let Tyson take his head off for 8 rounds. And I was sort of right about that, but I was sort of wrong. So I was sort of right because it wasn't 8 rounds of Roy Jones doing that. But I was sort of wrong because it was 8 rounds of Roy Jones mixing up his specialty with a lot of smart clinch work to slow Tyson down and save himself. And part of that was a consequence of the ring being a bit smaller, which they said was to bring more action, but I think it had the opposite effect. If you had had a bigger ring, Roy Jones would have had more room to maneuver, which I think would have made the fight more interesting. So I was a bit disappointed about that. Then the other obvious difference was that the rounds were a minute shorter. Aside from letting me have an easier time trying to score them, I think that was in Jones's favor because the man was gassed. And that might have been a strategy he had going in, like, hey, I might not be able to hold on to him forever, but I can hold on to him for 16 minutes. So I think the shorter rounds favored Roy Jones and the shorter ring helped him get the clinch, and it might have stopped him from letting his ego reign free and try and duck and dodge a bit more free, which would have made it more interesting. But as a Tyson fan, when I say more interesting, I kind of mean giving Tyson a better chance to take his head off. But my overall takeaway was just, it was really fun. I had a lot of fun watching it. Like,
So
they both came to fight, and it was great.
so we had a bit of debate about who we thought would be, or at least we debated Mike Tyson's uh, endurance for this fight, and I kind of pointed out that he hadn't fought in 15 years, but you're saying that he was moving better than Roy Jones was in the fight?
Well, first, just to be clear, he's the bigger man. Like, Roy Jones walks around at heavyweight now, but in his prime, he was several divisions lower than Tyson. So, especially with a guy as fierce as Tyson, just it's the advantage to him as the bigger guy. So, when I say he was moving around, I mean his mass times acceleration generated more force than Roy Jones could.
Oh man.
So he was walking him forward. He was throwing the harder shots. He was forcing Roy Jones to react to him. And overall, Jones did a pretty good job of reacting by forcing the clinch anytime he was in danger and using his footwork and head movement when he could. I think it was the 5th round. He had this beautiful, like, duck underhook, step outside of a wild uppercut Tyson threw. One or two no look jabs, which are just sexy. Yeah, it was. Tyson came in great. I was wondering what's Mike Tyson going to look like, and I won't say he exceeded my expectations, but he definitely met them. And I had pretty high expectations. So, I mean, credit to both fighters. It was really awesome. And it wasn't just the fight that was awesome. And that's why I want to circle out to a little.
So then, do you think that so this kind of kicks off Tyson's grand plan to create this whole Legends League? Do you think that this fight showed people that there's a potential for something like that, where you have those like 70-year-old golfers, the 50-year-old boxers, the 3-on-3 league of 50-year-old basketball players? Do you think there's a market for that, or is it just kind of that boxing hype is greater because that aligns with our parents' generation and that's what they grew up watching?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. The I don't see a league in the traditional sense where it's continuous games over a season. What I can see is spectacles, huge events, and the success of such a league is going to be dependent on each event and the hype it generated. So, as a premier kickoff event, this really couldn't have gone that much better. And the main reason that is because Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. both showed up and both put in, they came to win in the ring. So you can keep booking these events, but every event is going to be its own thing, and it's going to be the aggregate of what's produced at each event. So I think if you want to be successful, you have to be very carefully selective about who you let in and what kind of performance you can expect. Um,
Nice.
the
Yeah.
other thing is what I really enjoyed about this is that, yeah, Tyson hopes to spring off more from this, but this was a single event. And the goal wasn't really to make money because they knew Tyson's name would draw enough money in. So they didn't have to cover the ring with sponsors. They didn't have to constantly be putting plugs in between. One of my favorite things about the event was in between fights, they weren't just like mixing between plugging advertisements and plugging their next event, plugging their own product. Like when you watch a UFC or a boxing card, time is a resource and they're very aware of that. So in between fights, they're trying to get the most money out of time, either by making money on advertisements or trying to sell people on what's next. And that's good business, don't get me wrong. I don't want to just knock that and say that's horrible. I don't want that in the product. But there was a freedom they had in not really having to sell what's next and knowing that they were going to be financially secure in this. And I really enjoyed that. If my first biggest shout out of the night goes to Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr., my second biggest shout out of the night has to go to Snoop Dogg. The man fucking entertained. He went from calling fights to getting off his ass, putting on like a 15-minute performance, which my dad and I were just cracking up watching, and then getting right back behind the desk to call fights. And let's be real, he did it with like enough THC in his system to put both of us to sleep. So, man, I loved listening to Snoop call the fights. He entertained me performing, and I'm not even a rap fan. I'm going to take this moment to put out an open invitation to Snoop to be on this podcast anytime. It's now on my bucket list to sit down and watch literally any sporting event with him. I don't care if it's basketball, hockey, football, boxing, MMA. Huge shout to Snoop Dogg. That was really fun. And so circle back to you asking about what could we see next. I really hope they keep it loose, they keep it free. They had a panel with a play-by-play caller, Sugar Ray Robinson, boxing legend, Israel Adesanya, MMA current legend in the making, and Snoop Dogg. And you don't get that in, like, ESPN can't put that on their card, UFC can't put that on their card, the NBA can't do that sort of thing. Whereas this free, loose, undefined event, you can do that. So if they're going to move forward with this, I really hope to see more of that. But financially speaking, I don't see how they follow this up with anything bigger.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree with that. And the kind of space that I see this in is very similar to what you're saying. And to build off of this, like, they can't have a league with all these legends playing because it's just not going to be sustainable. But they can live in this space where they have those legends that have that nostalgia factor that bring in our parents' generation, and then how they're going to draw in enough audience from our market is they're going to include things like Snoop Dogg. They're going to include performances from Lil Wayne, who actually didn't perform, but he was going to. They're going to include YG, who actually was terrible, and we don't need to talk about that. They can have the style bender commentating, and then they can, in the undercard or as part of the card, they can have these extremely notorious, or I don't want to say popular because popular is not the right word, but when you have a YouTube influencer fighting an NBA player in your card, that's going to bring in Generation Z. And that's how you can draw that younger generation into watching some of these events. It's not, you're going to get the older demographic because they want to watch Mike Tyson fight, but that's how you're going to draw in some of these younger eyeballs. And that kind of leads us into Jake Paul and Nate Robinson, which
yeah, I don't really want to talk about it, but we do got to talk about it. Two things I want to check you on just before we do talk about it. First, I actually got one text from my buddy who was like, "Hey, how can I watch this Mike Tyson fight?" So I think Mike Tyson does have an appeal to our generation and former legends. Like, if you can find a way to get like Jordan on a court in some grand spectacle thing, I think our generation's going to tune in to watch it, even though we didn't get to grow up with Jordan. You could say the same about like Gretzky, or I don't want to undersell the past legends' ability to attract our generation.
I agree, but it's one thing to kind of attract the sport enthusiast, and it's another
Right.
to attract the general fan of entertainment, right?
I hear you. From a marketing perspective, for
Yeah.
sure. That's a demographic that if you want to succeed, it would be lucrative to tap into. All right. I guess I got to talk about Nate Robinson, Jake Paul. Uh, the first 2.5 minutes to me looked like two bums rushing at each other. Just they stepped up, they ran at each other, both swung, awkwardly ended up in the clinch, and
It was a cuddle
had the
fest.
ref disengage them. And then they just did it again and again and again and again. And I was like, oh boy, this is more or less what I expect. And then, okay, gotta give some credit to Jake Paul, because 2.5 minutes of that bum rushing, and he figured out how to time Robinson. He found a nice right hook, I believe, and landed it right on Robinson's ear as Nate was stepping in, and it hurt Robinson, dropped him. After he landed the first one, the round ended pretty well, and Nate being hurt made it that much easier to land the second one, which hurt Nate even more, and that made it that much easier to land the third one, which ended it. And that's the next thing I want to say, is it was really disappointing to watch the ref let Nate get up after that second knockdown. I mean, every 10 count I've ever seen, Nate Robinson didn't even pass the first one the first time he got knocked down. I think the ref understood that this was a spectacle and he wanted to let it go on a little more. And I kind of liked that he let Nate in after the first 10 count. The second one, the man was done. There was no need to let him get in there. He had no chance. He was hurt. He wasn't ready at the count of 10. He needed longer than that. So that was pretty hard to watch, because when the third punch landed, he was out and he was on the ground for a while. So disappointing from the ref. Let's talk about Jake Paul a little. He clearly has power. I didn't like that first 2.5 minutes. I was disappointed. It took him longer to figure it out, but I guess if you zoom back, he had 6 rounds to work, and he figured something out in the first round against a guy who really doesn't know how to box, but there's something there. So if he wants to show he's for real, I want to see him fight a guy who actually knows how to box. He can keep picking names, he can keep fighting guys who have never been in the ring before, but his post-fight interview, he was saying, I'm for real. In 10 years, he's comparing himself to Deontay Wilder. So if you want to be Deontay Wilder, who, don't get me started on cherry picking with him, but you've at least got to fight some guys who have some wins over other actual boxers. So I'm a little impressed by Jake Paul's power, the fact that he was able to time that, but I'm going to hold it at that until he actually gets a win and shows something impressive over someone who can actually box.
Yeah, I don't have much to say on that. I can respect the fact that he's trying to build his brand, and he does that by being out there and being controversial and saying things that are going to get him in the media. But I mean, he they're just annoying dudes, to be honest, him and his brother, and I don't want to see them if I can help it. And
Well, that's
yeah,
the marketing strategy, right? They piss you off and you want to see them get knocked out. You want to see them get hurt. And so you tune in. That doesn't work on you, but it works on a lot of people. Um, Actually, well, Jake Paul had 2 calls outs. One of them was so ludicrous, we don't need to talk about it. But the other one did kind of interest me. He called out Dylan Dennis, who is related to Jake Paul's ludicrous call out, as he is his grappling coach. But Dylan Dennis is a similar heel to the Paul brothers. Very annoying guy you really tune in because you want to see him get hurt, who is a jiu-jitsu specialist and is currently fighting in Bellator MMA. I believe he's 3-0 against absolute cans. So it's an interesting call out because you could tap into like what mixed martial arts was when it originally originated. You'd have a jiu-jitsu guy versus a boxing guy, and because Dylan Dennis fights in Bellator, which we'll say is a little thirsty for views, they would be more likely to be interested in making that fight. And when Logan Paul did his second fight with KSI2, they did it through DAZN, which is connected to Bellator. So an MMA fight between Dylan Dennis and Jake Paul does actually grab my interest. I would definitely tune in to see that. And I don't know if people are going to be talking about it, if it's realistic, but I think that would be a fun way to go.
All right. That's some great wrap up for you. And we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to see what else grabbed your attention on the weekend from UFC Vegas 15. And welcome back, Max. Your combat corner is in full swing. Walk me through some of the takeaways you had from UFC Fight Night on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm going to walk us through that bottom to top. And I'm going to talk about every fight I saw that had a finish, because luckily for us, there were a lot of finishes. So the first fight of the night was Nate Maness versus Luke Sanders. Sanders came out great. He showed nice boxing, was landing accurately, landing plentifully, had great pressure against Maness, was mixing up some grappling to keep him off guard. 1.5 rounds in, I thought Sanders was winning the fight pretty handily, and the only point of comfort was Maness, was that the couple times he did touch Sanders, it was having more of an effect on Sanders than anything Sanders was doing to him. And that then 1.5 rounds in, Luke Sanders again, he pressured him up against the cage, looked for some boxing, landed a couple nice shots, and then he kind of turned and walked off to get away, and it was just poor striking defense. And Maness found a nice shot in that opportunity, really hurt Sanders. Stayed poised, stayed on top of him. Sanders was able to get back up, but he was clearly not together. Nice body lock to take him down, threw a couple ground and pound fights to open him, strikes to open him up, and found the choke. It was interesting because he was losing the fight pretty handily. He took a lot of punches, but all it really takes is one punch in mixed martial arts. So credit to his chin, credit to his confidence and knowing he could still win the fight, and credit to his finishing ability. The next fight's a little sad to talk about because we love our CanCon here, but Malcolm Gordon, the Canadian flyweight, got finished in under a minute by, I'm going to butcher this, Sumudarji. This guy is a former bantamweight, 135er who moved down to 125 flyweight at 5'8". That gives him a great frame advantage over most of the division. And even scarier than that was his striking ability. He landed a perfect left straight as the southpaw right on Gordon's chin, hurt him. Beautiful hook to follow up, right on point, and Gordon just went down. He wanted no more, and it was a 44-second finish. Flyweight's a pretty interesting division right now because it's very lowly populated, so you put together 2-3 impressive wins and you're right at the top of the division. And that was Sumudarji's first. Interested to see what's next for him. Our condolences to Malcolm Gordon. Hope to see him bounce back.
Pour out some maple syrup for our fallen brother.
Yeah. This next fight was interesting. It was Gina Mazzani, who was a former bantamweight, moving down to women's flyweight, fighting Rachel Ostovich, who, to be honest, I was pretty ready to rip on because we talk about her more for her pinup calendar than any fighting wins she has. Absolute dime. But I don't want to rip on her too much because I actually enjoyed the fight. Mazzani was the bigger, stronger woman, and she knew it. She was able to pressure forward with her strength advantage, which cutting down to flyweight seems to have been a great decision for her. It let her get the better of a lot of grappling exchanges, starting on the feet, powering forward, and showing great top pressure. But Ostovich showed two things that really interested me. The first was a great counter hook. She landed several times, which showed she has awesome timing. I'll talk about her flexibility a bit more in a second, but I think her shoulder flexibility really lets her loop that hook around, and the way she was timing it was really interesting. So if she could learn to fight with more pressure, get a better jab, and push the fighters back and implement that hook timing, I could see some very interesting striking from her happening. And the second really impressive thing I saw from Ostovich through her flexibility was an amazing reversal. Mazzani was on top of her in north-south looking for a choke, and Ostovich basically did a yoga bridge where she put her hands down, planted, and then flipped her body over on top of Mazzani. If she had like some better jujitsu and choking ability, I think Mazzani might have just been so confused by what happened. There was a 2-second window for Ostovich to sink in a quick rear naked choke. So I see potential in Ostovich, and I don't want to rip on her too much, but she's certainly not there yet. And Mazzani had an amazing finish in the third round. She threw a front body kick right into the liver, made Ostovich wince, go down. Mazzani couldn't quite find the finish on that exchange, but she kept it in her mind. 20, 30 seconds later, back on the feet, and she went right back to that body kick, right back to the liver, and that was all she wrote. Awesome finish. Not a lot to say about this next fight. Saw it between Dos Santos and Day. I don't know too much about either of them, to be honest. But first round, it was a grappling back and forth with Dos Santos getting the better of most of the grappling exchange. But Day showed a nice reversal, got on top, and he found his body really elevated high, which you don't see too often. But Dos Santos had a guillotine counter as he went down, and I just don't see a lot of guillotines in that position where the defending fighter has so much elevation. I think that helped Dos Santos finish it, but hey, we love to see a first round submission finish. Keep my eye on Dos Santos. So that wrapped up the prelims. The main card opener was an awesome fight in the men's featherweight division, which is, I'm reminded almost every fight, an insanely deep division, because both guys looked great on the feet in the stand-up. They both had their moments. I thought Kamaka, the one fighter, was getting the better of the exchanges, particularly some nice leg and body kicks. Pierce, the other fighter, was hanging in there, definitely getting his licks in, but I think he knew it wasn't, the odds weren't favoring him the way the stand-up was going. So what do you do in mixed martial arts? You bring it to the ground. I think he tried once for a single leg, couldn't get it, found a nice hook off it though, just started to mix in the grappling. Quite soon after, went to a double leg. This time he got it, and you could tell he knew as soon as he was on the ground that he had an advantage there. And like I said, featherweight is super deep. Kamako is no slouch on the ground. Pierce brought him down. He had some moments, but Kamako was able to fight him off, get back up. But Pierce showed some tenacity into the second round, kept going to that double leg, which I really liked, kept bringing it back to the ground, kept getting a back mount, and he found a finish through ground and pound. He'd threaten the rear naked choke, get Kamaka's hands up, ground and pound, left, right, hooks, hurt him back to the rear naked choke. Eventually, he realized the ground and pound was more effective than the choke, so he started going to it more and more. And you don't see a lot of like real stoppages through ground and pound. Normally, it's a TKO. The ref decides you're not intelligently defending yourself. Pierce stopped him with his ground and pound. The ref, you could say the ref was late stopping it. Kamaka was showing enough defense that I think it's justified, but two more strikes and he would have been out cold. As it was, he was already pretty out. Awesome fight IQ by Pierce. Love to see it. Uh, the next fight I have to talk about, even though there was no finish, but I talked about it in the preview, the Alpha Ginger, Spike Carlisle. He put up on a crazy pace his last fight, and it drew my eye, so I wanted to see what would be next for him, if he'd make any changes, and he didn't really. Still did the same thing where he goes 120%, sees where that gets him, and he looks for the finish in every position he's in. And part of me loves that, but if you're going to look for a crazy submission or put everything into your strike, you've got to be confident about that being a potential finish. If there's only a 5-10% chance, don't do that. Keep your dominant position, hold your cards tight, and play them when you've got a better hand. The last fight, I thought Carlisle won despite the judge's opinion. This time I had no disagreements. I think Billy Algeo took it. Carlisle needs to either really learn how to sink in the finishes he's trying or change something up. I'll end this by just once again saying, man, featherweight is so deep, because this was a really dynamic, entertaining fight in the grappling and in the stand-up, and it just showed what a high level both fighters are at. And that's kind of the standard for several UFC divisions, the featherweight being one. So the next fight I want to talk about was the co-main event, Miguel Baeza against Takashi Sato, I believe. Baeza was coming in 2-0 in his UFC, I believe one unanimous decision and one beautiful knockout of Matt the Immortal Brown. The nickname says something about Matt Brown's durability. And wow, Baeza really impressed me. First round, he showed great striking. He started off countering, found a couple shots, and just started pressuring him as he started landing. Sato had a chin on him because several of the punches really landed, but Baeza didn't let that discourage him. He went to the legs with the kicks, he went to the body with the kicks, showing great striking IQ. But a round and a half of that, still not looking like a finish was going to materialize. So what does he do? Takes it to the ground, where he had I believe they mentioned he's a black belt. He searched for the rear naked choke, wasn't quite there, transitioned to full mount, started setting up an arm triangle as soon as he started that back to top mount transition. Had it pretty much locked in mount by the time it got to mount, and then made it look so seamless, just going from mount to side control where you want to finish that arm triangle. Miguel Baeza is looking like a stud. Welterweight is another one of those super deep divisions. Sato has some UFC wins under his belt, so I think all the more credit to Baeza for looking so dominant against him. I'm not on the hype train, but I'm excited to see what's next against Baeza and hope he gets a high-level opponent to show us what he can do. And that brings us to the main event between Anthony Smith and Devin Clark. So going in, I said this was Smith's fight to lose. I said Devin Clark does not want to strike. He wants to force a grappling exchange and make it a grindy, gritty match. And all Smith has to do is keep it in the center. He's the better fighter, and if he loses, he should retire. So I was half right. Soon as the fight started, Devin Clark came, lunging right hand right into a grappling exchange. Smith's frame let him deny the grappling transition, get a nice body lock, and he took it right to the ground, which kind of surprised me because, like I said, I think Smith's biggest advantage in the fight was in the center of the octagon. I really like what Smith did next. He dragged him to the middle before looking for anything. Once he was in the middle, which is going to neutralize some of Clark's grindy against the cage style, he started looking for a very high-level rare submission, a twister. Clark was on his game enough to not let that happen and managed to reverse the grappling exchange. Clark showed kind of poor top control once he got in there. He let Smith control his wrist, and hey, Smith is a high-level grappler and took that wrist control right into a triangle, finished it. I believe the whole fight lasted 2.5 minutes. So I was right in that this was Smith's fight to lose. I was wrong about how he chose to go about doing that, and credit to Smith for beating a guy whose main strength is wrestling off his back. yeah, so Smith manages to hang on to his top 10, top 15 spot. He seems to be pretty humbled by his last 2 years, but even more hungry than ever. And I like his mentality right now. He wants to take it one fight at a time. I'd really like to see him fight Magomed Ankalaev next. He also mentioned some interest in my boy Paul Craig. I would be happy with either of those fights. Credit to Lionheart. All the pressure in the world was on him, and he stepped up to it. All right, that wraps up the last Saturday. We're going to do a quick preview of next Saturday. Yeah, so last note in my combat corner is we're going to talk about the 3 top fights for this coming fight night on Saturday. Hermansson versus Vettori. So first I gotta say, poor Jack Hermansson. Marvin Vettori is his 3rd opponent that he's been booked against for this slot this coming Saturday. First, he was supposed to fight Darren Till. Darren Till had to withdraw due to injury, so they booked Kevin Holland against him. There seems to have been a shuffling between Holland and Vettori where they've taken on each other's opponents because Holland is fighting the Saturday after. And now Jack Hermansson is fighting Marvin Vettori, which this is a risk for Hermansson and an opportunity for Vettori. And I'm going to start there. This is very interesting because Marvin Vettori has a split decision loss to Israel Adesanya, which means he's the only fighter where a judge has said, you beat Israel Adesanya. And the way that fight played out was a striking exchange in the first round that I thought was fairly even. I thought Adesanya had a bit of an Anderson Silva mentality in it, where he wanted to read Vettori and let Vettori strike at him. And my reaction at the time was thinking that was enough for Vettori to win the round. I haven't gone back and watched it since. It was a close round. The second round of striking was not close. Adesanya pieced him up, landed a highlight kick. I think it was a question mark. And then the third round is what made it interesting because it's the round where Marvin Vettori was the only fighter who has successfully controlled Israel Adesanya on the mat through his grappling. Almost no one's been able to take him down, and no one except Vettori has been able to keep him down when they do get on top of him. So that was a different Izzy. He's clearly a much better fighter today than he was when that fight happened. But Jack Hermansson is a top 5, top 6 middleweight. If Marvin Vettori can score a win against him in this short notice opportunity in a middleweight division that is not, there's no clear number 1 contender Izzy wants to fight other than Robert Whittaker, who Izzy's already beat, then a win for Vettori might put him 1 win away from a title shot. As for how the fight itself, Jack Hermansson is a very high-level grappler who has managed to turn himself into a quite decent striker. His last fight, he had a heel hook win over Kelvin Gastelum, which was very impressive. You don't see many heel hooks. And Kelvin Gastelum is a guy with absolute power in his hands. One wrong move, and Hermansson probably would have been hammered into unconsciousness. But Vettori is quite the wrestler and grappler himself. He has kind of drawn some hype to his name because he was scheduled to fight Carl Robertson 3 times this past spring and got into an altercation with Robertson when Robertson fucked up a weight cut. And Vettori made the most of it, showed some great wrestling to a choke and just general dominant grappling to take out Robertson. Hermansson, much higher level grappler. I'm kind of curious. I expect Hermansson to want to take this fight to the floor. I'm curious to see if Vettori decides he has a bigger advantage in the striking, or if Hermansson pulls guard, I'm curious if Vettori is going to take the top position when it's offered to him, or he's going to play it safe on the mat. It's going to tell us something about his confidence in his grappling, and it's going to tell us a little about his fight IQ based how it goes. I haven't seen him against enough high-level opponents to really be able to say what I expect from him, but it's a good main event. I'm excited to see it, and I think the winner puts themselves in a top 5 and ready to move upward middleweight position. Next, going down the card is the co-main event between Owen St. Preux and Jamal Hill. Jamal's 2-0 in the UFC right now, 1 win by unanimous decision and 1 win by blistering knockout in 2 minutes. Owen St. Preux is a longtime vet. I don't have the time to go into all his wins and losses, but he's most recently coming off a nice knockout win against a similar up-and-comer at light heavyweight, which just a great time took. So a couple things interest me about this fight. It's going to be southpaw versus southpaw. And Jamal's hill that led him to that impressive knockout in his last fight mainly came from his lead right hand, which you don't always see with southpaws, but he has great accuracy with it. He has great speed with it. And most importantly, probably, he has great timing with it. So that's the first question. The second question is going to be the power kicks, because both fighters have power in their power leg. Owen St. Preux has an absolute highlight knockout over Corey Anderson by roundhouse head kick. Part of Hill's finish after he landed those hard right hands was a knee to the body with his power left leg. So I'm curious to see who can get a bigger advantage with their left leg power kicks. Last thing I'm curious about is the grappling. St. Preux is a beast of a man. He's got great jiu-jitsu. I want to call it the Von Preux choke to give credit to Von Flue, who invented it, but St. Preux has now pulled off more submissions with it. Anytime Owens fights, you want to see if he can do it again, if the bastard can keep getting away with it. But Hill was taken down 6 times in his fight before the last. He won that fight by decision, but that's a hole in his game, and Owens is a much better grappler than Dario Stosic, who Hill fought last. So you can't talk about the fight without wondering what the grappling is going to look like and noting the obvious advantage St. Preux should have there. So we'll see what Hill does to neutralize it and how much St. Preux wants to lean on it. Last fight on this card I want to talk about is the fight before the co-main. Talia Santos versus Montana De La Rosa at women's flyweight. So Santos is a 16-1 fighter, which just catches your eye. Now, only 2 of those fights are in the UFC. One's a split decision loss, which I believe she did lose, and the other is a win by unanimous decision over Molly McCann this summer. So watching those fights, it looked to me like Santos just came in tentative in the first 2 rounds of her UFC debut. She just was very hesitant. She let the woman just bully her forward, ended up with her back against the cage, had some lot of letting herself get clinch controlled, took a fair amount of bottom control time in the first round, but she had her moments. She showed good knees, she showed good kicks, and then in the third round, she figured something out, how to circle away from that bully forward style and get her striking more on point. And then you really saw that carry into her second fight against Molly McCann. She looked a lot more comfortable on the feet, didn't let herself get bullied backwards, showed some amazing Muay Thai clinch knees, and some really dominant grappling against McCann, who's a striker trying to learn how to grapple. And she threatened with chokes. She landed nice ground and pound, great following with the hips. Montana De La Rosa, I'm sorry, but is a bit of a journeywoman. She's not a top contender. She's probably never going to be one. She wins some, she loses some. This is Talia Santos's fight to come in and impress us. She's had 2 decisions. She hasn't looked bad per se in either one of them, but if she wants to take her brand, her rank to the next level, then she needs to step in and impress, and that's what I'm going to be looking for her to do. One interesting tidbit is De La Rosa scored a win this past winter, I believe, over Mara Barella, the woman who has the 1 win over Santos. So styles make fights, and we'll see if there's anything there. But in this constantly aligning women's flyweight division, which always has my eye, we are looking for who are the next generation of girls who's going to replace the current old guard at the top that, in my opinion, needs replacing. And I'm watching Talia Santos to see if she's one of those girls. She's 27, so she's got plenty of time to impress and make her mark, but I'd like to see her start doing so now. And that wraps up my combat corner.
Awesome. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to walk through what the Raptors roster looks like now that the waiver deadline is passed. And I might have some thoughts on the upcoming draft in 2021.
Looking forward to it.
And we're back. Max, we're going to dive into a little bit of NBA talk. And today it's going to be mostly about Raptors because not really anything has happened in free agency. Quick announcement, CanCon, Nick Stauskas, the Brampton boy, getting a minimum deal with the Milwaukee Bucks. Disappointing when he was drafted number 8 way back, but hopefully he can keep his NBA career alive. But we'll move from that kind of happy thought into a little bit of more serious conversation. So the Raptors did not cut Terrence Davis, essentially picking up his contract guarantee. And give me your first impressions about that.
Yeah, so the analysis I heard on this basically said that the NBA protocol is for teams to not be the disciplinary oversight in such situations. The NBA itself is going to do so, and that the Raptors deciding to waive Terrence Davis could be interpreted as disciplinary action, which would be an overstep on part of the Raptors. So instead of thinking of it as the Raptors have decided to pick up Terrence Davis, it should, I think, be understood as the Raptors have decided to wait and see what happens in the courts with Terrence Davis, which I think is the right move. I mean, it's a bit spicy for a sports podcast to get too much into the criminal allegations, but obviously domestic abuse is very tricky to understand in our court system. It's often my word against your word. So I don't want to just say we'll let the courts play it out and trust what the courts say. I think there is room for the NBA to have a balance of probabilities understanding of what plays out in the courts and decide what to do based on that. But right now we're not doing anything. I think that's the right call. We'll everyone gets their day in court, and we don't have to go with what the courts say to decide what to do about Davis, but the evidence will certainly speak for itself and decisions should be made based off that.
Yeah.
But
And Terrence Davis, he had a great rookie season and he's still on the team as of right now. But I think with the way that this kind of news broke out and the way it's going to come down, they're most likely going to be able to move on from him without too much of a hassle from the players union, because a lot of other guys can provide what Terrence provides, and just the culture that the Raptors have built, he doesn't align with that. And so I see him, even though they've kept him for now and they're avoiding that whole disciplinary perspective, I don't think he'll be on the team come opening day.
yeah, I heard his next court heat day is like December 11th or so, I believe. Yeah, I just don't want to interpret the Raptors' lack of action or action on this Sunday as showing any interest or faith in Davis. It's more just trying to comply with the NBA regulations.
So with that news about Terrence Davis, kind of the picture becomes clearer, and with that sort of confirmed moving forward that he's not gone, but he most likely will be. And I'm going to move on with the assumption that he probably won't be on the team opening day. It gives us a clear picture of what the Raptors roster is going to look like to this point. And on the whole, I think they got slightly worse, but it depends on the steps that some of their younger core pieces take will affect where they end up at this point in the season. So
I agree with you, and I will jump into that. But I just want to asterisk it by saying the decision to get slightly worse, I absolutely agree with for the opportunity at the free agency market. All right, let's
exactly.
talk about those steps.
Yeah. Well, okay. So Kyle will probably give you the same output you'd hope. But again, he's 1 year older, and point guards who reach this age and this stage in their career, there's usually a pretty steep decline in production around this point. So you can't be so sure that you expect the same level of production from Kyle because he's just been an all-star every year for the past 8 seasons. So you could actually see him taking a bit of a step back, but I guess that's why they signed Fred VanVleet, and you hope that he can take another step forward in becoming the leader of that offense. The shooting numbers off the dribble will probably have to go up. The playmaking is going to have to go up for Fred because who knows how much longer Kyle's going to be on the team, and he's really going to have to fill into that role. And then the two other guys where you could see them taking a step forward are OG. I think he has the potential to take a big step forward on the offensive end. Pascal, you could see, has been passing off a bit of that spin move knowledge to him last year. OG's shown off some of the spin moves. The handle needs to get a little bit tighter, and the around the rim finishing needs to get a little bit tighter. And then you'll see him hopefully be able to catch a shot that's an open look, but attack a closeout. So if he's catching a corner three, like opportunity in the corner, but it's not a great shot because someone's closing out, he's going to be able to blow by them and maybe attack the basket and set up someone else for a better shot. And then finally, you hope that Pascal maybe takes another small jump forward and becomes that true max superstar that the Raptors are paying him to be. And he looked like it at the beginning of the season last year, but obviously the defenses were a little bit loose in that beginning of the season. So you hope he can kind of maintain that beginning of 1920 season production across this 2021 season.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the Raptors are at their best, the defense is forced to play loose against them because they don't know where the threat's coming from. They don't know if they have to worry about Van Fleet taking a step back three outside the arc, Lowry getting in hot, OG showing, I'll circle back to this, but like his rare flashes of offensive brilliance, or Siakam being that superstar you're talking about. And when those three guys plus whoever we have at center are firing on full blast, that's, I think, what allows Siakam to be the superstar. So the step forward I'd like to see is the ability for him to do that even when the defense is like regularly double teaming him and he's their number one priority. If we're going to pay him like a superstar, that's what I'd hope to get out of him.
Yeah. Ideally, he'll get some help with Aaron Baines being a slightly better floor spacer than a Gasol and similar to an Ibaka. But Aaron Baines you'll have Gasol and Ibaka sit in that paint spot a little bit more when Pascal was getting those post touches. But if they play with him in and 4 shooters out, he'll hopefully have a little bit more room to operate. And that's kind of how I see the center rotation going, is you'll see Aaron Baines as our starter. And he did that in a decent enough role with the Suns last year. He played the most minutes he's ever played per game in the low 20s, and he'll probably see that sort of workload this season. I really like that they were able to get Alex Len for really cheap because he's basically like dollar store JV and will be able to provide you a big body to throw at key matchups. So if you need someone who's going to go in there and take up a ton of space against an Embiid, against a Giannis, against whoever else it may be, like a DeAndre Jordan, he's at least like built big enough to take up space, and he's actually an underrated rim protector. He's not going to get a lot of blocks, but he's going to alter a lot of shots. And I just see him being like low minutes, comes in, has a big offensive rebounding, physical presence, and just will help. He'll take away a couple of fouls that Baines or Boucher may get when they're playing greater minutes in that role.
Yeah, one of the things I was most uncomfortable with heading into the season was our lack of a big body. And we didn't get a skilled one, but at least we got a role player. So Nurse has one more piece he can work with, and I think it's an important one.
Alex Len was the 5th overall pick back in the ill-fated 2013 draft, which also featured Anthony Bennett. We we don't claim Anthony Bennett anymore. But Alex Len, hey, 5th overall pick. Maybe there's still a little bit of potential left in there. It's a little bit late now, but you never know.
I mean, almost every player the Raptors have picked up have gotten better. You look at like Ibaka, you look at Freddie, you I don't want to take too much credit for Kyle because he's just managed to slowly steady get himself to that all-star performance. But I think the Raps have a great culture to allow players to blossom. Even Kawhi, I mean, obviously he was already a superstar, but being in the Raps locker room, he played at that peak potential. So maybe there's something there for Len.
Yeah, one would hope.
I
The
want to
only
talk a
guy, yeah, the only guy who would kind of go against that culture of development would be Dewan Hernandez. But that also kind of shows if you're making the late second round pick every year because your team's been so successful, it's super rare that those guys are going to hit. And the fact that they've been able to find like a Fred and other undrafted players and those late first round picks and been able to turn them into something special is kind of a miracle in the Raptors development. But Dewan Hernandez is always a reminder of even if you're that great, some players just aren't cut out to be developed in the first place.
for sure. But Len has some consistent NBA minutes over the years, so I like the material you're working with him a bit better than a Hernandez. But yeah, no, I love the Raps because they've kind of flipped the conventional wisdom on its head. It's the rule, not the exception, that players get better when they come to us that you don't have reasonable expectations for, and it's the exception that those type of players don't take at least one significant jump.
Definitely.
uh, I gotta talk about OG a little more. I agree with a lot of what you said, but I think you can boil it all down to confidence. Honestly, the man just becomes invisible on offense for like stretches of 10-15 minutes. I see him do one or two really great things, like a beautiful drive, a pass I really like, some amazing defense. I'm like, oh my God, OG. And then 10 minutes later, I've forgotten about him. So I think he needs to get his confidence higher and start treating himself like the superstar that we all hope and think he can be. And there's going to be some growing pains, there's going to be some mistakes, but it's about that confident mentality because I think he's worth making those mistakes.
Yeah. And with OG, the biggest thing is right now he's the 4th option probably in that starting lineup in terms of who's getting the ball to score. But with the Raptors knowing that 2021 offseason is their big ticket, this is kind of a no expectations. Let's see what we have here. Let's try and make the playoffs. Let's do something, but we're not expected to win a title. So this is the opportunity for Nick Nurse to say, okay, what do we have here in OG? What sort of looks can I get him to help him start develop his offensive game in order to down the line, if we get one of those big name free agents, he's the perfect third piece to a Siakam and a number one guy, right? And so that's kind of the opportunity that they have this season is let's see what we have with OG. Let's see what we have with Norm. Let's see what we have in Fred, McCaw, Matt Thomas, Malachi Flynn, Chris Boucher. A lot of those guys could either improve or decline in terms of what sort of production you'd expect from them in the following years.
I think that's a good way to end off on the Raptors talk. We have this opportunity to really evaluate every one of our pieces, and 2021 off season is going to be where we make a huge decision about the future of the team. And this year is the year to gather all the data we can that will help us make that decision.
Yeah. It's also not a bad year to not be one of those late first round picks because this 2021 draft, man, it projects to be super deep. And I'm actually really excited for some of these prospects who are coming out of college. I've been watching a lot of clips recently because college basketball started last week. And what people are saying is the top 5 to 7 picks in this upcoming draft probably could have gone number 1 in this year's draft. So you've got Cade Cunningham out of Oklahoma State, who just looks like a freak of nature. And he hasn't had one of those signature highlight dunks yet, but he posts up smaller guards. They do a lot of high-low at Oklahoma State. And in transition, he's unstoppable. He's attacking or he's finding the open shooter. And so I'm really excited to just keep watching his games. You've got Jalen Green, who chose not to go the college route, went to the G League. Hopefully that'll run this year, but that actually could hurt his draft stock. But going in, people had him as a top 3 pick, and he's going to get a year of pro under his belt if the G League runs. You've got BJ Boston with Kentucky, who got upset the other day, but he looks to be another like lengthy wing who can score, and he showed some flashes of defense. A lot of these guys are kind of the perfect prototypical build for the modern NBA. 6'7", 6'8", length, ball skills. They can shoot it. They can defend. Another guy, Jalen Johnson. And this was actually his first game stood out the most to me. He had 19 points, 19 rebounds playing with Duke, and he had a couple of insane blocks. Like, I go watch the highlight because they're playing Coppin State, who's not a solid team, but they're still a Division I team, right? And he obliterated them. And he's 6'8", 6'10" wingspan, weighs 215. So he's this huge body and he's super mobile. And he had like this one putback dunk over 3 guys, which was just beautiful. I'm very excited. You've got Evan Mobley, Jalen Suggs, Zaire Williams, Jonathan Kuminga, all those guys. So like 1 through 8, there's potential for a franchise changing talent. And the Raptors won't be in that range, but it just pushes all those guys who would have been in this year's draft, kind of mid-lottery picks. It pushes them later and later into the draft. And so being deeper in the draft is it's not the worst place to be, but hopefully the Raptors can end up kind of in that late teens, early 20s range and maybe get one of these exciting players who are falling down the draft board a little bit.
So on our last podcast, when we started talking about the state of the West, you said you expect 14 of the 15 teams to be potential playoff contenders. So how do you think those teams are going to operate then, knowing what you just said about the draft? Like, do you see them all making a push, or do you think a couple teams with slightly less realistic playoff hopes are going to not push too hard and look to this draft? And if so, do you think the East is going to pick up the majority of that, like top 7, top 8?
Yeah, I will. So with the West, it's one thing to think that you're able to compete for a playoff spot, and it's another to actually do so. So you got teams like San Antonio, Minnesota, New Orleans, who probably want to be a playoff team, but won't be just because the competition in the West is so strong. So you'll have those teams probably falling a little bit down the board. And then once it gets later into the season and they know they don't really have a shot, that's when you'll see teams really pull out the tanking maneuvers. Yeah, but I think you're right. What we're going to see is because that East has a little bit less parity, you're going to see a lot of those bottom teams in the East really be skyrocketing towards that number 1 pick, like the Cavs, like the Knicks. Oh man, if the Knicks got one of these guys, it'd be huge for them because they've had some poor luck in recent years with the draft lottery. And so you'll most likely see the East with some of those players, which is not great for the Raptors long term. But again, with the lottery, you never know, right? That's why I love the lottery. It kind of de-incentivizes some of that tanking that these teams do.
But with if you've got a 1 to 7 draft deep, then all you've got to do is tank to like the 3rd, 4th bottom spot, and you can feel pretty confident
About where you're going to end up, yeah.
You're making me wonder if there's any way we could move for a team we think is going to, like a pick a team in the West, tempt them with something that makes them think they could be a playoff contender, pick up their draft pick, and hope they do
Yeah.
not become a playoff contender and steal one of those picks. But that's a bit too much of a pipe dream. But
Yeah, I
Zach,
think
if you're listening,
if that would happen, it would have to be Norm. Norm would be the guy.
yeah,
You'd package Norm in a first for uh, a first from one of those teams. I just think because the draft is known to be deep all the way through, like past those 8 picks, a lot of teams have been trying to hold on to this draft's
yeah,
picks, and they'd be more likely to move like a 2022, 2023 pick as opposed to this year.
yeah, I'd maybe like it tempting the Timberwolves with Norman a first because uh, I, he wouldn't be getting starter minutes, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
not
but
going to happen.
they have Edwards and they have Malik Beasley, who we don't know what will happen with him, but so they're a little bit deep at shooting guard. Yeah, and San Antonio, maybe New Orleans he would fit in with, but I don't know. You have Lonzo
I
and
don't want that for New Orleans. I think New Orleans is going to do well.
okay, yeah, we'll see. I mean,
It's not going to happen, but it's fun to speculate on.
it would be so fun to have Zion paired with one of these super mobile, like lengthy guards, like a Cunningham, Jalen Green, Jalen Suggs are all listed as point or shooting guards, and they're all tall, 6'4" or taller. So if you pair that with a Zion, whew, that would be so much fun to watch.
Yeah, I guess the one other trade that's on my mind for potential would be if OKC wants to bundle like 3 of their 17 first round picks to try and like pick up a top 10 one in the 2021 or an additional top 10 one.
I definitely think I could see that happening. And Oklahoma State already are gonna be tanking, but if they package together some of those picks, they could maybe get 2 of these guys in the
Yeah.
top 7, which would be absolutely incredible.
I mean, we said last podcast, it's so fun to speculate about what OKC could do because they have no current expectations and such a strong asset base and are going to definitely pick up one future franchise player, it sounds like. I'd definitely consider, because if you can pick up a second one, then you've got your core with Gilgeous Alexander, and suddenly you're
Dort, Lou Dort, the other Canadian, that boy, love Lou Dort. He's my guy. All right, that just about wrap things up for today. It was a pleasure to talk with you once again, my friend.
as always, bud.
And yeah, and we got Eagles, Seahawks tonight, Steelers, Ravens tomorrow. Hopefully, those are entertaining. But beyond that, not so much in terms of sports this week. But I'll see you on Friday, and we'll catch up then.
Looking forward to it.